of Unit 9, Organisms' Response to Stimuli, with Lesson 2, Plant Systems. Here's our warm-up answer in the Zoom chat box. This drawing shows a human body system. What is the primary function of this body system? And I'll pause for you to read the answers and answer. If you chose C, the transport of nutrients, water, and oxygen to body cells, you would be correct. Okay, lesson goal today. You should be able to recognize levels of organization in plants and animals, including cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, and organisms. And our essential question, what are the levels of organization in plants? And there's our standards. Okay, a lot of vocabulary. So we have plant, cells, tissue, organ system, primary cell wall, secondary cell wall, vascular ground and dermal tissue, cuticle, stomata, root hairs, trichomes, parenchyma, parenchyma, xylem, phloem, shoot system, stem, herbaceous, woody, unbranched, branched, nodes, apical buds, axillary buds, leaves, photosynthesis, petiole, root system, taproot system, fibrous root system, bulbous roots, aerial roots, prop roots, specialized taproot, and epiphytic root. And I may have said that last one wrong. All right, so the plant system has 5 levels of organization. We know that plants are made up of specialized cells, and we know that specialized cells perform specific tasks. Tissues are groups of similar cells working together. Organs are the different tissues working together. Organ systems are 2 or more organs working together. And a plant is all the organ systems working together. So we've learned this as far as animals are concerned. All plant cells have flexible primary cell walls that expand as the cell grows and elongates. Some plant cells have a secondary cell wall that is inflexible, and that helps support the plant. Secondary cell walls are usually composed of lignin. Okay, there are 3 types of plant cells: vascular, dermal, and ground tissue cells. And we're going to start out with a video.
He knows a lot about the science stuff. Professor Dave explains.
We just talked about the different types of plant cells, but now we need to understand how those cells organize themselves to form larger structures. First, let's review the levels of organization in living organisms. Cells are the building blocks of life, but cells are usually organized into tissues, and these tissues will often be organized into organs. And this is true of plants just as it is for animals. Plants have 3 main types of tissues, and all of these tissues are comprised of the plant cells we discussed in the previous tutorial. So let's go through these types of tissue now. First up, ground tissue makes up the majority of a plant's body, so to speak, and it's broken up into 3 subgroups based on cell type. Those are the parenchyma, the collenchyma, and the sclerenchyma, which we just learned about. Ground parenchyma tissue is the most common tissue in a plant. It appears in a variety of locations and does many jobs. Parenchyma tissue is responsible for the photosynthetic layer in leaves, called the mesophyll, where the plant performs gas exchange and creates sugars, making its own food. Parenchyma tissue is also how a plant stores excess energy in the form of starches, which are complex polysaccharides. Starch-filled parenchyma tissue can be found in a plant's roots, and parenchyma tissue also makes up the majority of a seed, so that the starches can feed the embryonic plant until it's able to photosynthesize on its own. Additionally, parenchyma tissue is so prevalent throughout a plant that it also takes on the role of growing to cover wounds and replace other tissues lost through physical trauma or disease. Wound closure is an important function for plants just like it is for us, because if a plant has an open wound, then all sorts of pathogens like fungi and bacteria could invade the plant and quickly kill it. The other two subtypes of ground tissue, ground parenchyma tissue and ground sclerenchyma tissue, are also composed of cells by the same names. As we now know, both parenchyma cells and sclerenchyma cells have thick cell walls made of cellulose, and in some cases lignin, which provides structure for a plant. Therefore, ground parenchyma and ground sclerenchyma tissues can be found throughout a plant wherever structural support is most important. But as we said, ground tissues are just one of the three kinds of plant tissue, and these ground tissues are essentially sandwiched between the other two kinds of tissue in a plant. On the external surface of a plant, we can find dermal tissues. This name makes sense because dermal is a word that relates to the skin or exterior of a living organism, so these tissues essentially form a sort of skin for the plant. A plant's skin is called the epidermis, and it's a layer of cells only one cell thick. Most of these cells don't have chloroplasts or other specialized organelles. They're primarily there just to serve as a protective layer to shield the more important tissues beneath. As extra protection, most epidermal tissues secrete a waxy substance called cuticle that prevents excess water from escaping the plant and also protects the plant from invasion by pathogens like fungi and bacteria. This cuticle is one of the main evolutionary advantages that land plants exhibit over their aquatic ancestors. Some epidermal cells can specialize to take on hair-like shapes, which help the plant with specific gas and nutrient transfer functions, but these hairs can also be useful in deterring insect herbivores that might try to graze on the plant. A plant also needs some openings in the epidermis in order to let water and gases travel in and out, so as to maximize the surface area available for material exchange. These openings are called stomata. However, if they were left open all the time, then pathogens could infiltrate the plant through these areas. Therefore, some specialized epidermal cells, called guard cells, are utilized to cover the stomata. These curved cells appear in pairs on either side of a stoma and work together to open or close the stoma as needed by the plant. The function of guard cells is especially important for plants living in very dry areas that need to keep water from evaporating away during the day, so the stomata will often remain closed until the sun goes down. You can see this happen in warm season grasses and other plants growing in arid environments. In older sections of a plant that aren't growing as fast, the epidermis may transition into a thicker layer of cells called the periderm, which is the semi-permeable layer of the bark, where bark is a word that refers to all the tissues outside the vascular cambium. The periderm produces and is then protected by the rhizome, which is the outermost layer and most familiar part of bark, since it's the layer covering the trunks of trees, which everyone can immediately see. The rhizome protects the inner layers of the plant and is composed primarily of dead cells. It becomes especially well developed in the older stems and roots of trees. The final group of plant tissues is not actually present in all kinds of plants. Vascular tissues are the main characteristic that separates vascular plants, like trees, from non-vascular plants, like mosses, and it allows vascular plants to have a wider variety of growth strategies. Vascular tissue is important for large plants like shrubs and trees because it redistributes water and nutrients throughout a plant's body, allowing for trees to grow tall without losing the capacity for nutrient transport between distantly separated parts, like the branches and the roots. Vascular tissue is what allowed the ancestors of modern plants to abandon their reliance on living in or near water sources, meaning that we can now find plants in almost every environment on Earth, regardless of how dry they seem. We will discuss these aspects of plant evolution a bit later in the series. Vascular tissue can be further broken down into two types, xylem and phloem. Xylem is a vascular tissue made of dead cells called tracheids and vessel elements. These are both elongated cells whose walls are strengthened with lignin, the substance that makes woody plants so stiff and strong. Xylem is the vascular tissue responsible for transporting water and mineral nutrients upwards. The roots of a plant absorb water and minerals from the soil. This water is brought to the center of the root, where it encounters the xylem. Within the xylem, there are two kinds of transport tubes, composed of the tracheids and vessel elements we just mentioned. Tracheids are smaller and tapered at each end, while the vessels consist of cells lined up to create open tubes, which are also called xylem conduits. These conduits are around the width of a human hair and can be extremely long. Water is transported in a passive manner through the plant by pressure and chemical potential gradients. Specifically, this movement is driven primarily by potential differences in water caused by the negative pressure differential generated by the evaporation of water from the leaves. This process is known as the cohesion tension mechanism, or CT mechanism. Essentially, the water is initially pulled up through the xylem due to the cohesive and adhesive properties of water, in this case referred to as capillary action, which we discussed in the general chemistry series. But as the plant grows, there is never a break in the water column within the plant. As water evaporates from the leaves, it draws the water column upwards against gravity, causing tension. This process, which is responsible for the tension part of the CT mechanism, is known as transpiration, and it occurs when water evaporates from a plant's leaves into the air. So the mechanism of transpiration and the resulting surface tension at the stomatal openings pulls water molecules upwards to replace those lost by evaporation. This force is transferred through the plant's water columns down to its roots, where it causes more water to be pulled in from the soil. This continuous water transportation pathway is known as the soil-plant atmosphere continuum. So that covers the xylem. The other kind of vascular tissue we mentioned is phloem, and it's composed of living cells called companion cells and sieve cells. Companion cells regulate the function of the phloem, while the sieve cells execute this function. Phloem tissue is responsible for transporting the sugars produced through photosynthesis in the leaves to all of the other parts of the plant. Sieve cells are connected by sieve plates, which are membranes with pores through which the sugar solution can pass. The movement of this sugary sap through the phloem is caused by positive hydrostatic pressure. This process is called translocation, and it is driven primarily by phloem interacting with specialized cells to load and unload the sap. To be more specific, cells in the leaves, which are capable of photosynthesis, act as a sugar source and can thereby load the sieve cells of the phloem by transporting sugar molecules into them. This causes some of the water from the xylem to passively enter the sieve by osmosis, thereby thinning the sap and creating pressure, which pushes the sap through the sieve plate pores and down the tube. This will eventually make it to other cells which we can consider sugar sinks. These are the cells the plants use to store sugars, like the roots as well as fruits if present. Here, cells actively transport solutes out of the sieve, producing the precise opposite effect as with the sugar source. This concentration gradient for the sugar, from source to sink, is what manifests the pressure flow through the sieve tube, and thereby the movement of sap through phloem. In this way, xylem and phloem vessels act sort of like the arteries and veins that comprise the circulatory system in our bodies, in that they shuttle important substances around so that they can be made available to all the cells in the organism. So that covers the three types of plant tissues, those being ground tissue with its three subtypes, parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma, dermal tissue, and vascular tissue, which can be divided into xylem and phloem. Now that we know the different kinds of cells in a plant and how they group together to form different tissues, it's time to see how those tissues form the different organs or parts of a plant. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on
Okay, I know that threw a lot at you. We're going to take it bit by bit.
Patreon.
He knows.
Okay, so the dermal tissue. This covers and protects the plant. It controls the gas exchange and water absorption. The cuticle, as you can see here, is a waxy covering on the dermal tissue of leaves and stems that prevents water loss. You've probably felt some plants that were like this. The stomata or stoma. These are specialized pores that allow gas exchange through holes in the cuticle. The root hairs, well, it's like just what you would imagine. They look like little hairs. They increase the surface area of the root to help absorb water and minerals. And the trichomes may be present on the stem and leaves and aid in defense against herbivores, which are the predators of plants. Then you have the ground tissue. It has different functions based on cell type and location within the plant. The parenchyma or collenchyma, and you'll hear that pronounced several different ways. So, the parenchyma cells provide the bulk of plant tissues, such as the soft part of the leaves, the fruit pulp, and other plant organs. Okay, and this shows you the parenchyma cell. The collenchyma gives shoot support during active growth, provides support for vascular tissue, and structural support for the stem, and it also helps store water and sugars. The vascular tissue, this transports water, minerals, and sugar to different parts of the plant. And there are two specialized tissues that make up vascular tissue, the xylem and the phloem. The xylem tissue transports water and nutrients up from the roots and provides structural support in the stem. And the phloem tissue transports organic compounds down from photosynthesis to other parts of the plant. So the xylem, this is a xylem vessel, and the phloem. So the xylem up, the phloem down. And this just shows you the difference in the dermal, the ground, and the vascular tissues. So the dermal, you've got the epidermis and the stomata. The ground, the parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. I can't say it. And then the vascular tissue is the xylem and the phloem. So the xylem up, phloem down. Quick learning check. What is the vascular tissue that transports water up the plant? I'll pause for you to answer. If you chose xylem, you are correct. Xylem up, phloem down. Okay, let's get into the plant organ systems. The shoot system. Vascular plants have two organ systems, the first of which is the shoot system. This contains the stems, the leaves, the flowers, and the fruits, which are the reproductive parts. The shoot system grows above the ground, well, in most cases, so it can absorb light for photosynthesis. The stems provide support to the plant, connect roots to the leaves, transport water and minerals up to the plant, and sugars from the leaves to the rest of the plants. Stems sometimes grow below ground, for example, potato. And stems have different varieties. You can have herbaceous, which are soft and typically green. We have woody, which are hard, unbranched, meaning they just have a single stem, and branched, meaning they have divisions or side stems. We've got a video here that tells us about the plant organ systems and the shoot system. Basically, the plant root system and the shoot system.
Plants consist of organs, tissues, and cells. Each of them has a specific structure that allows them to perform a particular set of functions that help the plant to survive. This video will cover plant organs and plant organ systems, also known as the root system and the shoot system. Okay, here we go. To begin, we should clarify what we generally mean when we refer to organ systems, organs, tissues, and cells. It's important to be familiar with these terms in order to understand how each structure contributes to the plant. A group of organs that work together is called an organ system. In humans, a familiar example might be the digestive system. In the digestive system, many organs work together to obtain energy from food. In plants, the so-called shoot system involves many structures like stems, branches, and leaves, which collaborate to allow the plant to harvest energy from the sun. Organs are a collection of tissues that form a unit with a specific function, for instance, the stomach in humans or a single leaf in a plant. Plants also contain specialized tissues and cells, but these will be covered in another video. Plants are multicellular eukaryotic organisms. Most survive by absorbing water and nutrients from their environment and by harnessing energy from the sun in a process known as photosynthesis. Plants are generally split into two major categories: non-vascular plants and vascular plants. Non-vascular plants such as mosses, hornworts, and liverworts do not have a system of xylem and phloem tubes to transport materials around the plant. Because they must rely on diffusion, these plants tend to be smaller and to have simpler tissues and structures. Many of these structures are only a few cells thick because diffusion can only occur effectively over very short distances. While they can sometimes have structures that somewhat resemble leaves, stems, or roots, they're not considered to be true leaves, stems, or roots because they lack these crucial transportation structures. This video will focus mainly on vascular plants and their specialized organs and organ systems. Vascular plants have two major organ systems, the root system and the shoot system. The root system is usually mostly underground. It supports the plant and absorbs water and minerals from the environment. The shoot system generally grows above ground, which allows some parts of it to absorb the light needed to perform photosynthesis. We'll now discuss each major organ system in detail, beginning with the root system. The roots have three major functions: anchoring the plant to the soil, absorbing water and minerals and transporting them upwards to the rest of the plant, and storing the products of photosynthesis. Some types of roots can also perform gas exchange, and a few types of plants have adventitious roots, which are at least partially above ground. The root system consists of primary, secondary, and sometimes even tertiary roots, in addition to root hairs, which help to increase their surface area. The last centimeter or so of the root is where cell division occurs. There are three major zones. The zone of cell division where new cells are formed, and if you've looked at onion root tips while studying mitosis in class, this is likely the area you observed. The zone of elongation, where the new cells stretch and increase in length, causing the root to get longer, and the zone of maturation, where cells specialize or differentiate into their unique roles. At the very end of the root is the root cap, which contains organelles that perceive gravity and allows the main root to grow down rather than at random. There are two major types of roots: tap roots and fibrous roots. Tap roots have one major root that grows straight down, sometimes with a few smaller branches protruding off of it. It looks a bit like a carrot, and in fact, carrots, beets, dandelions, parsnips, and jicama are all examples of taproot plants. Taproots are advantageous in dry environments because they can reach far down into the soil to reach water. Of course, this also makes them much harder to harvest or remove. For instance, think about how difficult it is to remove dandelions from your lawn. Typically, dicots have taproots, and some taproots, like those found in carrots, jicama, or beets, also function as a storage space for sugars and starches. Fibrous roots have a network of smaller roots that protrude outwards, usually at a much shallower level. These can be excellent at helping them to prevent soil erosion and are typical of monocots such as grasses. Now let's move on to the shoot system, which consists of stems, leaves, fruits, and flowers, or basically any structure that is not a root. Stems are part of the shoot system of the plant. They provide support and also connect the leaves, where photosynthesis occurs, with the roots, where some of the products are stored. Stems come in many shapes and sizes and can be soft, woody, branched, or unbranched. Stems also contain nodes, which are the attachment points for both leaves and flowers. The areas between the nodes are called internodes. Leaves are the major site of photosynthesis. Their cells contain chloroplasts, which harness energy from sunlight to produce sugars. Chlorophyll, the pigment inside the chloroplasts of the leaves, is what makes most leaves green. Leaves come in many shapes and sizes, each of which is specifically suited to its environment. For instance, plants in hot, dry environments often have spiky leaves or needles to help reduce water loss. In addition, some plants, such as succulents, store water in their leaf tissues. If you'd like a more detailed view of the interior structure of leaves, I've left a link in the video description. Flowers and/or fruits are related organs that are both part of the plant's reproductive system. The three female plant structures, the ovary, the style, and the stigma, are collectively known as the carpel. Flowers contain both male and female gametes, pollen and ovules respectively, but many plants can't self-fertilize. To get around this problem, some exchange gametes by attracting pollinators who will transfer pollen from one plant to another. Fruits are structures containing seeds, which form from the ovary at the base of the flower once it has been fertilized. Notice how the structures of fruits and flowers are quite similar. After the ovules are fertilized, the petals drop away and the ovary swells and grows into a fruit containing the seed or seeds. Apples, bell peppers, pea pods, cucumbers, eggplants, squashes, and more are technically all fruits. This is because they developed from the mature center of the flower. So, in summary, vascular plants have two major organ systems, the root system and the shoot system. Within each organ system, there are a number of useful structures that help the plant to absorb what it needs from its environment and/or to perform photosynthesis. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel. Plants can...
All right, so continuing on with the shoot system. The nodes are the points of attachment on stems for leaves and flowers. Looks like a little knot. Internodes are parts of the stem between the nodes. They're internodes. Apical bud is at the tip of the shoot, the stem, and contains the apical meristem. So here it is. Axillary bud, that is this. It's between the base of a leaf and the stem, where it can be the beginning of a branch or flower. The leaves are the main site for photosynthesis, of course, and leaves are attached to the stem by a petiole. The roots of vascular plants have three major functions. Number one, anchors plant to the soil, absorbs water and minerals, transporting them up to the plant, and storing products of photosynthesis. The two types that we've heard about in the video, the taproot systems and the fibrous root. Taproot systems have a main root that grows down vertically and has smaller lateral roots. Taproots are advantageous for plants in dry soils. It taps out the water. Fibrous root systems are closer to the surface, and they are a dense network of roots. Fibrous root systems help prevent soil erosion. Root system structures have adapted for different purposes. You have bulbous roots, that's for starch storage. Aerial roots, think about the air, so above ground roots for additional support to anchor the plant. Prop roots, think about propping something up. They're above ground roots for additional support to anchor the plant. Specialized tap roots, these have been adapted for sugar and starch storage, for example, like beets. And epiphytic roots, these enable a plant to grow on another plant. So let's summarize this up. What are the levels of organization in plants? Okay, 5 levels. We know this from animals. Plants are made up of specialized cells. Those specialized cells perform specific tasks. Then you have tissues or groups of similar cells working together. Organs are different tissues working together. Organ systems are 2 or more organs working together. And that should say a plant is all organ systems working together. And we're going to end it with an Amoeba Sisters video.
It is no secret I love houseplants. I do. Always have. In my younger years, I used to have quite the collection, but I made a terrible mistake starting out. I thought all plants like exactly the same things. Lots of water, lots of light, and me serenading them with my violin music. Besides a violin, which I can't comment on that, I can tell you that treating all the plants with lots of light and lots of water was a mistake. Maybe some of them liked it, but a lot of them did not. Why? You know how there are many different types of animals. Well, there are many different types of plants as well. They don't all require the exact same amount of light and the exact same amount of water. There is so much diversity in plants. There are over 300,000 estimated species of plants. And there are some fascinating adaptations that have helped them live in a variety of environments. This video is going to briefly touch on types of plants, their structure, and some fascinating adaptations. First, we need to outline 2 general plant categories, vascular and non-vascular. Recall in the human body, your vascular system includes arteries. Well, plants don't have arteries, or blood for that matter. When we're talking about a vascular system in plants, we're talking about 2 major types of tubes, or vessels, called the xylem and phloem. The xylem carries water. Xylem is found throughout a vascular plant. Water is absorbed from the roots of a vascular plant and carried upwards. Roots help anchor plants and also absorb the water found in the soil that they are in. The xylem continues up from the roots, through the stem, to the leaves. Structure-wise, the stem has a function of providing support to the leaves. Now the other vascular tissue, the phloem. So recall that glucose, a sugar, is typically produced in the leaves during photosynthesis. All the plant cells will need sugar. Sugar is the plant's food source. The phloem carries sugar from the leaves where it's generally made throughout the plant. By the way, the word phloem might start with a P, but it does have the same F sound that food has, so it helps you remember that it carries the plant's food. If a plant is non-vascular, it does not have vessels like the xylem and phloem. However, it still needs water, and it still produces sugar. It just can't carry it upwards in the xylem because it doesn't have one. That means non-vascular plants typically are limited in size. A giant tree needs a xylem for water transport. The water is being carried against gravity. Non-vascular plants instead get their water by osmosis, kind of like soaking up water like a sponge. Non-vascular plants are often informally called bryophytes. I say informally because it's kind of like when you use the informal word protist. The term bryophytes is often a collective, informal term that includes 3 different phyla. A phylum that contains liverworts, a phylum that contains hornworts, and a phylum that contains mosses. And actually, the phylum that includes mosses is a phylum called Bryophyta, so again, just be aware of the informal use of the word bryophytes. As they're non-vascular, bryophytes are generally small and are more frequently, but not always, found in areas where there's a lot of moisture. They do not have true stems, nor true leaves, nor true roots, although they can have structures that resemble them. Now let's briefly discuss vascular plants. Again, vascular plants have xylem and phloem. These plants have true stems, leaves, and roots. We can arrange vascular plants into 3 general categories. The first category, seedless vascular plants. As their name suggests, they have no seeds. This group includes a phylum that contains lycophytes, like club mosses, which are different than the moss and the bryophytes, and it includes a phylum that contains monilophytes, like ferns. Second category, gymnosperms. These include several phyla, one phylum that has ginkgo, one phylum that has cycads, one phylum that has cnidophytes, and one phylum that has conifers. The word gymnosperm means naked seed, as they don't have their seeds enclosed like the next group we'll get to. Instead, many gymnosperms have cones. Gymnosperms have neither flowers nor fruit. Third category, angiosperms. These are the flowering plants. They have flowers, they have fruit, though not necessarily an edible fruit. This is a huge group. It's estimated around 90% of all plants are angiosperms. Within the angiosperm group, many angiosperms, but not all, can be categorized as a monocot or eudicot. You'll see some of the characteristics we included of these two groups in our illustrations here, but just know there are some exceptions. Overall, just trying to really emphasize, the angiosperm group is the largest, most diverse group of plants. Even though every plant species is unique, let's talk about general plant structure. The structure of plants is critical for plants to be able to perform photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the ability to make sugar, the plant's own food source, from sunlight. And it requires three main ingredients: water, carbon dioxide, and light. To get all three of these things, the plant needs specific structures and adaptations, which we're going to walk through. First, water. We mentioned already how a plant can obtain it in different ways, depending on whether they're vascular or non-vascular. Next, carbon dioxide. Many plants have these fascinating little openings, pores really, called stomata, or singular stoma. Stomata are typically, but not always, found on the bottom of leaves. Stomata have a major role in gas exchange because gases can travel through them, and a gas plants need directly for photosynthesis is carbon dioxide. But don't forget, when it comes to gases, plants also do cellular respiration, and to do that, they need the gas oxygen. However, plants generally produce more oxygen in photosynthesis than they need in cellular respiration. Now, while gases can flow in through these stomata, there's still a little problem. Plants can't usually keep those stomata open all the time. When they're open, water can escape. And remember, plants need water, too, for photosynthesis. So the plant must determine whether to open or close its stomata, and it does this with the help of guard cells. If guard cells have the stomata open, the plant gets the gases it needs, but it can lose water. If guard cells have the stomata closed, it gets to save its water, but then it limits gas exchange. At night, many plants, with a few exceptions, close their stomata so they can conserve their water, as they aren't doing photosynthesis at night. Last on the list that plants need to capture is light. Plant cells have organelles called chloroplast. These amazing organelles are not found in animal cells. They are the site of photosynthesis, so they help capture light energy for the process of photosynthesis. Plants also have pigments there. Chlorophyll is a major one that can absorb certain wavelengths of light, like red or blue light, but plants can contain other pigments too, which can expand the different wavelengths of light that they absorb. Leaf structure is really important when it comes to capturing light energy. The size and shape of leaves can be different based on where different species are found. Plants that live in areas where they must conserve water might have thin leaves, so they don't have much surface area to lose water. Think about pine trees with their skinny pine needle leaves, or think about plants that live in the desert. Many of these plants also have especially waxy leaf cuticles to protect against water loss through the leaves. Plants that have lots of access to water, but maybe are shaded by a lot of taller plants in the jungle, might have really broad, wide leaves so they can soak up as much sun as possible. It's hard to live in someone else's shadow. Since there's plenty of water, these plants may not struggle with water loss concern and can have more leaf surface area. Now, we talked about general plant structure, but obviously there are plants all over the world with unique structures and adaptations. Before we end our video, we want to conclude with some especially fascinating ones. Plants and other organisms use nitrogen in the building of proteins. So what happens if plants live where the soil is low in nitrogen? You may have heard of carnivorous plants like the Venus flytrap or the pitcher plant. These plants still do photosynthesis to make their sugar, but carnivorous plants also have the ability to digest insects, typically by using special enzymes in a juice they secrete. Insects are a great way to supplement their nitrogen need. If you ever look at ingredients in plant fertilizer, you will find many fertilizers are high in nitrogen. You can also have too much of a usually good thing. What about plants that live where it's too wet? Many types of mangrove trees live in waterlogged soil. These plants can have specialized roots that help them deal with the low oxygen and potentially high salt concentrations in a variety of ways. See our recommended reading. Plants can even turn into thieves to get the nutrients they need. You've heard of mistletoe? Is it terribly ironic that they can be parasitic, as they can use their specialized roots to steal nutrients and water from a host plant? There are a ton of fascinating plant structures and adaptations we encourage you to explore. And don't forget about the value of learning about plants. After all, plants are essential for life. They are producers, which means they are the main support for food webs. Many medications that we have today are derived from plants. And while plants aren't the only photosynthetic organisms, plants are definitely known for their photosynthesis, which produces oxygen for us to breathe by the photosynthesis that they do. Explore more about plants with our shorts on plant tropisms and plant hormones and our entire video on plant reproduction and the structures involved. Well,
All right. So our exit ticket, what is not a function of the root system? I'll pause for you to answer. If you chose create food for the plant through photosynthesis, you would be correct because the root system anchors, absorbs, and stores. Okay? And I will tell you what we're doing next.